Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest edition of CharitEpulse, our bi-monthly charity podcast. My name is Catherine Rastomji. I'm charities partner at Shakespeare Martineau, and I'm joined today by my regular co-hosts, Charles Mosquita, charity director at Quilter Cheviot Investment Management, and James Saunders, charity audit partner at Moore Kingston Smith. And together we explore the latest pressing issues affecting the not-for-profit and voluntary sector. So this week we've got some interesting stories we're going to dive about all over in terms of what's been happening. I'm going to start with the Charity Commission having issued not one but two official warnings this week. And the first one I'll mention is in relation to East London Mosque Trust, which managed to lose £1 million, £1 million, which I kind of thought was quite the big deal to have lost that amount of money. There was a commentary by the charity itself, which seemed to be playing down the seriousness of that loss. And I just had various conversations this week with others in the sector saying, I'm not sure that's the right tone to take. I think any loss is a big deal. And the fact that the Charity Commission have issued an official warning about how the trustees have behaved during this process, I found interesting. So, James, I might start with you on this one, whether you had any particular thoughts.
Yeah, the commission has told them off twice, hasn't they, effectively in this report. Firstly, for the due diligence around the investment deal not being thorough enough, which is the big criticism about any sort of investment that you might make, and is why there's so much guidance in advance of doing an investment that you do need to make sure if you're planning on this sort of stuff, if you're contemplating it, you must make sure you've taken right advice from the right people, and you can't just invest charity money, willy-nilly, as it were, on a whim. So that's the first side of it. Is the Charity Commission has said that this charity has not done the right due diligence in the first place. That it said that they were expecting a 20% return in 6 months, but in the end, the supplier went into administration. So it's quite a spectacular failure, really. It's not just a not a return. It's that the whole thing went bust. The other side, then, they've also criticised them on an ongoing basis. And it does seem that they have, the commission has told this charity off before about the trustees' lack of effective oversight and failure to properly scrutinise investment policy and investment decisions as a whole. So they've told them off on two fronts, really, and there's two criticisms in there.
I mean, I thought it was interesting, Charles. I don't know how many client meetings you might have where a client would turn up and say, we expect 20% return in 6 months. Go.
Yeah, that should send definitely risk warnings to anybody, because it sounds too good to be true, and clearly in this case it definitely was. I find this slightly amazing. I mean, the turnover of the organisation, I had a look at the report and accounts, is around 5 million. They do have investments in the respect that they have property assets, which I think in total are valued at about 40 million, but the investment property is 16 million. I mean, I think this is an organisation that if it didn't take advice, then I would be fascinated to understand why they thought this was a good idea. And particularly as they don't seem to be investing elsewhere. And the other thing, looking at the report and accounts, being a mosque, is that they need to invest within Sharia law, which is quite complex. I mean, we have a specialist unit that does it. And there are a certain amount of restrictions. So yeah, I find this quite amazing, and yeah, I don't think that it's a very clever remark from the charity to say, actually, in the scheme of things, this is not significant. I think everybody who's given money to them, I think, will feel somewhat disappointed. The other thing I thought was interesting is that the Charity Commission did, as one of their comments, is that they should try and recoup as much money back as possible. Well, I'm not quite sure how easy that's going to be if the organisation's gone bust, but I assume that there'll be a receiver and there might be something at the end of it. But yeah, I find this a bizarre situation, and it would be certainly nice to have a bit more clarity once report. The other thing is that the Charity Commission have required them to go out and have an independent governance review, which I think would also be quite interesting.
Indeed. So I think that one was more exceptional. The second official warning was around inflammatory social media activity. And this related to the Palestinian Refugee Project, where one of their trustees, who was also the charity's voluntary chief executive, had made some comments on social media. And this, I suppose, I would contrast with a recent example we'd seen where the Charity Commission had perhaps overreacted about comments made on social media by a trustee who had stepped down from a number of organisations, whereas in this case, the individual has been disqualified for 8 years due to her role in mismanagement and or misconduct of a charity. So 8 years is not an insignificant amount of time. So I thought there's quite a contrast here. And I think this seems to be an ongoing issue for charities to understand what they should and shouldn't be doing on social media. Charles, any thoughts from you on this one?
Yeah, I mean, again, it just shows, doesn't it, that you need to be very careful about what you post up and how that is represented, and make sure the rest of your board is aware of what you're doing. I mean, I have some sympathy, not necessarily in this particular case, because I haven't actually looked at what was posted, but you know, if you feel passionate about something and you want to post that up, that can get you into trouble in the respect. And sometimes you do have to be quite vocal about to get change, but it's getting that right balance, and that's not easy in any shape or form. So I think, yeah, my advice to most people is, if you're going to write something, probably write it the night before, sleep on it, and then have a look at it in the morning. And if you still think it's sensible to post, then post it. But you definitely need to keep your co-trustees abreast of what you're doing and make sure they feel equally comfortable about it.
Definitely. James, anything from you on this one?
Yeah, I mean, it seemed to me that the Commission was focusing as much on the failure of or lack of understanding of proper governance in the charity. I think they said all the trustees were related, so there were potential conflicts of interest. And then when the Commission investigated this, the responses from the trustees suggested that they actually didn't really understand their legal duties and responsibilities. And in the end, the one trustee who posted for the social media commentary was acting unilaterally, even though the trustee all seemed to be related. So it was as much, it seems to me, about the governance and formation of the board and the knowledge of what they're supposed to be doing as the actual content of the social media activity. And I suppose it does show that if you have the right controls in place in the first place, you're probably going to reduce the chances of getting into trouble for posting dodgy stuff or, you know, contrary stuff on social media.
Yeah, tip of the iceberg, maybe, I think, in the way that it was summarised, whereas maybe there was a lot more behind this one. So now I'll move on to Charles, has been out and about in the charity world this week, and he has attended the Charity Finance Investment Forum, which was a gathering of a select number of charities with investable assets of £5 million plus. So I think some interesting discussions and comments and sessions at that, Charles, if you're happy to share some details.
Yeah, no, I mean, unsurprisingly, the topic most investment managers seem to cover was around investment under a Trump presidency, Liberation Day, the US deficit and everything else. But actually, what was more interesting were two sessions. One was on should charities invest in defense? And I have to say, I was very surprised by people's reaction, because I was expecting there to be much more resistance to that. But actually, two things came across. One is that boards are definitely discussing it. And there has definitely been a change in attitude towards whether charities should. And I have to say that the catalyst of this, of course, is that for the last 30 odd years, up to the Ukraine war, you know, we were having the peace dividend, armies were being hollowed out, and defense was being reduced, and therefore the investment case for actually investing in this was pretty poor. So it was quite an easy decision. But of course, that's now changed. I mean, you only need to look at what happened in the NATO summit and the commitment to 3.5% of GDP. But what was interesting, other than, I suppose, Quaker organizations that are pacifist, is that charities were saying that there is a responsibility from them to be investing in defence. And also we had a big conversation around cyber warfare and cyber crime, of which we're seeing quite a lot of that at the moment. And then actually, how do you separate out of what are pure defence companies to those that are actually providing, the chips for the planes and everything else that came. So it was a really, really interesting conversation, and one that I have to say surprised me.
Really interesting. I think that's quite a contrast, isn't it, to what we would have heard some years ago and what you might expect to hear. I find it interesting whether people have a moral opinion on it or whether it's more than slightly influenced by the potential returns that they could get and therefore they don't want to exclude that unless they have to. I don't know if that's me being unkind, perhaps.
Well, I think certainly the potential returns, it has put it on people's radar. I think people were at the moral issue. I think people were definitely removing their own personal views on it, although, but it was just something that they hadn't really been challenged about, and it was saying, well, okay, fine. Is this clearly against our charitable purpose? Does it? Are we? I mean, one viewpoint, which actually came from a church, was that for us to protect our beneficiaries, having a strong armed forces is a deterrent, and therefore that's acting in the best interests.
Interesting. Now, James, our viewers can't see your thoughtful
I'm
face.
struggling with this. I mean, Charles, would it be fair to say that you were in a room with people who might be open, might be more positive about charity investing in defence than perhaps the average might be?
No, I don't think so. As I said, I was surprised by the reaction, and it's not. This is not that I've tested this with in other groups.
I mean,
expected to react differently.
Yeah, I mean, in other, from day-to-day jobs, if you like, I hear a lot more of we're getting protests because we're being associated with an organization that has some links to the defense sector, and particularly around Israel and Palestine at the moment. And any of the defense companies can be linked to some sort of artillery or machinery or any sort of weapons or weaponry systems or ammunition. Very easy to make any of those links, and very easy then to say to a charity, this is against all your charitable purposes, because charity is wider than just whatever. I'm hearing that a lot. So I think I have a feeling that it's always going to be very personal, isn't it? It's going to be personal to individuals on boards, and we've talked about this before, being able to make that collaborative decision in the end, despite differing personal views. I've heard boards get into all sorts of trouble about accepting donations from organizations that have these sort of links, not just investing in them. So I think it only takes one voice to protest, and suddenly you've got a bigger problem, a growing problem on your hands as a board of trustees. So I think you've always got to be very aware, and it probably goes back to, have you got an agreed policy in place in the first place? That's, I mean, you must be familiar with that. Or, the best investment committees, for example, know exactly what they're going to invest in and have thought it through in a big way.
Yeah, I mean, the law is very clear on what you should and shouldn't be doing, and that these shouldn't be personal decisions, and you should be deciding in the best interest of your organization. There is no doubt about it that, and it was raised on a number of occasions around reputational risk as an organization. And the thing is absolutely key is, one, that you've had the conversation, you've recorded it, and you have a clear statement about it. Because actually, I think you can make a very just case of why you would be wanting to invest in defence, and why actually that's a positive thing rather than a negative thing. Because the issue around where the sales are, of course, is that, if you're a UK company or you're a Swedish company or whatever it may be, they have to get the license from the government of the day to actually export to anybody. So they can't just sell their equipment to anyone. So there are a certain amount of controls in place. I accept this is a difficult decision for many organizations, but it's certainly something that, again, we are increasingly seeing people are raising the subject, and I am getting increasingly surprised by people's attitudes towards it. And I suspect that has an awful lot to do with what's gone on with Ukraine, and then subsequently the issues that have been raised.
And then I think the second item you had mentioned to myself and James was all around management of cash and banking. And of course, we have talked about charity banking issues previously. So I wondered if you could set the scene, Charles, in terms of what this point was.
Yeah, again, I was sort of slightly surprised with organisations of really quite significant sums that cash management, or the understanding of what charity trustees' options were, rather than just sitting it in the bank account in their with their bank. And one of this is the reason this has come up is that, of course, banks are paying pretty paltry rates, most of them, of when you sit cash there, and it becomes, I mean, I describe it as a wasting asset, but you're probably not maximising the opportunity. And there's much more that people can be doing. So you've got money market funds, you've got government, short-term government gilts and things like that. And I was just sort of slightly surprised that the trustees hadn't had more of a conversation with their investment managers, where actually you can set up an account very simply and do it so that it's complementing your banking arrangements. Because I fully appreciate that some people will be concerned about the effort it takes to open up an account. But if you've got an existing account with the investment manager, why wouldn't you do it?
And I think from a governance point of view, I mean, at trustee training sessions, I would never claim that it's easy, but one of the duties of trustees is to maximise their charity's assets. So I do talk about, if you've got sums that are sitting in your bank account not earning very much interest at all, and you don't need to access those funds on a daily basis, you should be looking at what else could you do with them. But James, I wondered whether you had any thoughts about what might be putting trustees off, perhaps, why it's sitting in their bank account in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, it's the real world. I think real world examples of 2 points that Charles made, really, and to elaborate on those. Firstly, the complications of opening accounts these days, and I think it might well be not as difficult with investment managers, especially, as Charles says, if you've got an existing investment manager to open another account. But the sector at the moment is tarnished, and trying to open a bank account at the moment is really, really difficult. And it'll be the same with opening anything new, and they get put off that sort of stuff. All the anti-money laundering regulations that have to be complied with, all the going into branches. Now that might, well, I'm not saying that it automatically applies to investment managers as well, but that's the perception out there. And the other point really is, I think trustees are very, very wary of tying up any sort of money in anything other than liquid cash. And I know that Charles will say it doesn't have to be tied up at all. But again, it's a perception piece around, gosh, we've got to have money ready in case something goes wrong with a project, or we need it for this, or we've got, heaven forbid, a redundancy program to get through, or anything like that. I think from the board's perspective, there are 2 reasons to go to be prudent, if you like.
Yeah, and I think it's their perception, isn't it, that they might need it and they can't get it, rather than understanding, but you can get it because it's still liquid and you can access those funds, but you've got the best of both worlds because you're getting more interest from it. So I think sometimes it's that lack of proper understanding, maybe, where it's perception rather than the reality.
And just to put that into perspective, money market fund is, you can get the money back in 3 days. Gilts, exactly the same thing, back into your own bank account. And I mean, Bar Research UK, where I think we're sitting on about 1.6 million, of which medical research that we're going to be spending out over the next 3 years, by placing it out into those funds, we've uplifted the amount of interest that we get from about, I think it was less than 1% up to 4%, which has meant that we've got another 60,000-70,000 pounds to spend a year on medical research. So why wouldn't you do it? Security's better. You're diversifying your risk. You're not putting the capital at any more risk than having it in the bank account, and you're getting something closer to base rate. So I agree. Why wouldn't you do it?
I mean, certainly anecdotally from experience recently, the last couple of years in particular, any sort of reasonable sized charity with a CFO or equivalent, a genuine head of finance who has some idea of what they're doing, will have thought about this. It's not something that they won't have thought about, and they will know, as you say, Catherine, they do have a duty to maximise returns. And having it sitting in a bank account, a current account, earning zero interest is they do need to think about it. It's the hesitancy and the reticence to in their eyes take a risk on putting it anywhere. I think that is the problem. It's not ignorance in the first place. It's the fear of doing something about it.
Yeah.
But I still think people lack. There are a lot of people who lack necessarily the understanding, and it's not their job. Why would they? Because they don't deal with these things and they don't necessarily understand what they're investing in. But particularly if you've got an investment manager, they should be giving you the advice and they should be able to give you that clarity.
Sounds like there's a chance of a few free advice visits, Charles, from the investment managers.
Well, funnily enough, I had a call yesterday from an organisation which had reserves of, I think they have 600,000, of which they need a couple of 100,000 working capital, but the rest of it, they're saying, what can we do with it? So, I've just set out for them some very simple things that they could be thinking about.
Well, there's another very big point there, isn't there? That actually, to be perfectly honest with you, the investment managers aren't really going to be interested in smaller charities generally. They're really, they're looking at your good self excluded, of course, Charles, on this. You're always happy to help. But I know, again, from experience, if you go along with less than, say, £1 million in reserves, they're not really interested in even talking to you, frankly.
Yeah,
is that fair, or am I?
No, I couldn't possibly comment on my.
I said present company accepted.
But I think you're absolutely right. I think, but if we know, because we've been dealing with charities for a long time, that the whole sector's premise really is about sharing. And therefore, I absolutely take the point. I don't care how much money somebody's got and how small amount it is. If I can at least help them, signpost them and give them the information they can need, make a informed decision, why wouldn't I do it? Okay, fine. It might take, half an hour, a conversation or whatever it may be. But, you're always wanting to make sure, however small the organization, that they're doing the best with their money so that they can maximize the public benefit. I'll get off my soapbox now.
Well,
very, very, very generous. Very, very, very generous and spirited of you.
Right, I'm going to move us along now to an article we've seen this week. And the headline is Large Charities Should Shift Power to Communities to Remain Relevant. And the chief executive who has said it is Matt Hyde, who is currently chief executive of the Lloyds Bank Foundation for England and Wales. But some listeners might know him more as the former chief executive of the Scouts. And I just thought in general that was an interesting headline. It was talking perhaps more gently about encouraging large charities to focus on shifting power towards local communities. But I would still take some issue with that from a charity law decision-making point of view. But I did wonder if maybe I was being overly sensitive reading the article, and James, Charles, whether the two of you had any alternative views.
Yeah, I can kind of see both sides of this coin, and it's a difficult one, really. I have a close family member who's been very heavily involved in an organisation very similar to the Scouts, but for girls. Let's put it that way, for decades, and has become more and more furious with that organisation. Along these lines, really, central decisions not being made in the interests of wider community groups. And I don't think it's all in the public realm, but the Girl Guiding the Guides organisation sold a load of local facilities totally against the local community groups' wishes. And came unstuck in the press, really, with an awful lot of negative press about the decision to be, decisions being made centrally for financial reasons. And I wonder if possibly the commentary that we're looking at from this from Matt Hyde is possibly related to that. But I can see that when he says a big monolithic machine more focused on numbers, I mean, that's one way of looking at that guiding situation, I think. On the other hand, of course, in a big organization that is a charity, you have to, as local groups, you have to abide by the charity law and regulations that the central does. And trying to keep control as a central board of trustees over all these diverse groups must be very, very difficult. And I don't think there's many organisations that have really cracked it yet.
Yeah, I think my objection was more the terminology move towards local community ownership. And you think, what does ownership mean? What does this, shifting power? I just think, to my mind, puts us in conflict immediately. And two of the examples given in the article was Macmillan and Mencap. And I would say, well, they both operate in the community because that is and always has been their model. But Charles, did you have any observations as you had read it?
Yeah, I mean, I always get a little bit when I read sweeping statements, and I sort of think, can you really apply it across the board? That said, I mean, you've got two sides to this, haven't you? You've got one of the reasons that organizations get together for whatever reason is that there's the benefits of economies of scales and having the right infrastructure and everything else and the expertise, where smaller organizations struggle with be able to do that. But then, where the magic happens, a lot of it is on the local, in the local areas, and it is to do with the local communities and how do you balance that? And I do sometimes wonder, a lot of this is actually about communication and poor communication, and one not talking to the other and actually listening and trying to work out ways forward. So, I think about the hospice movement, which I think has actually been really good at doing this. It's kept itself local, it bases itself local, and it makes it has that feel. And I think people.
But Charles, the thing about the hospices is that they are all individual charities.
Yeah.
So although Hospice UK is the regular, and actually that's a quite good example of a group of relatively large charities in their own right. Some of them, are quite big and influential, actually operating well through a regulatory body or a representative body, at least in Hospice UK. The distribution of the hospice grant last year and this coming year, it seems to be a reasonably sensible process. But that is not one. Clearly, there is not one hospice charity with all these locals. That's there is a difference there.
No, I agree, but but as I said, I think there are lessons to be learned of how you can do that well, because I know certainly in the past that the Hospice UK have had issues around being the umbrella and the rep. So it hasn't been smooth riding, as far as I understand, with them over the years. So they've had to probably learn quite a lot over the time. So yeah, I mean, it's horses for courses, but to my mind, half the problem generally is around communication.
Yeah, indeed. But I thought it was an interesting article, even if I pretty much disagreed with everything in it. But there we are. It's not always about me. But thank you both for your comments in this session. Apparently, we've become popular on YouTube. So if you have already found us on YouTube, please give us a like and a follow and say something that we can comment on perhaps in a future episode. You can find us on our own websites, on Spotify, Apple Podcast, different locations. We'd very much welcome suggestions for things to cover in future episodes, but generally just to hear what you think. So thank you for joining us and hope to see you another time.